بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. Last week we explained the necessity of explaining the Quran and how the Quran cannot be independently understood. The Quran requires tafsir, the Quran requires interpretation, and we explained how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was not only ordered to deliver the Quran, but he was also ordered to interpret the Quran and explain the Quran and do tafsir of the Quran. وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. We brought down the dhikr upon you, O Rasulullah, so that you explain to the people what has come down upon them, لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, so that they may think. So there's a whole purpose behind having the Quran. The Quran is not just a book that you read for the sake of entertainment. The Quran is a book of tadabbur, a book of thinking, a book of pondering. And this is why you see many times the Quran, it asks people and it insists, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ إِنَّهُ لَقُرْآنٌ كَرِيمٌ فِي كِتَابٍ مَكْنُونٍ لَا يَمَسُّهُ إِلَّا الْمُطَهَّرُونَ. The Quran says that only a few people or a group of people will be able to truly understand the Quran and reach the highest meanings of the Quran. So this is what we explained last week, that the Quran cannot be independently understood. So what happened after the Quran was revealed? Yes, brother.
Is this verse for all of us, that La yamassuhu illa mutahharun? We cannot touch it without tathhir?
This verse, it has a specific definition, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. This refers to the understanding, the ones who truly understand the Quran, and that's Rasulullah and the Ahlul Bayt.
Not physically touching it.
No, this is not talking about lams. This is talking about mas, which is, according to the Tafsir, it says that it's the intellectual understanding, intellectual touching, basically, of the Quran. It doesn't have to do with the touching, the actual physical touching. Yes. So we explained that the Quran requires to be interpreted. Now, what happened? Today, inshallah, we're going to explain the history of tafsir. What was the history? How did tafsir develop over time? So, over time, after the Quran was revealed, there were many efforts to interpret the Quran and understand the Quran, because that's the whole mission, that's the whole goal of the Muslims. If you understand the Quran, then you have understood your faith. So over time, there were various steps and methods to understand the Quran. So we're going to go through these methods and approaches towards the Quran, but before doing so, we're going to talk a little bit about the history. So some of the methods that emerged were tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, exegesis of the Quran by the Quran, using verses of the Quran to try to interpret other verses of the Quran. We'll explain that inshallah. Another is tafsir al-Rawa'i, using ahadith, using narrations of Rasulullah, of the Ahlul Bayt, to interpret the Quran. And then over time, many other methods emerged. For example, scientific methods, choosing a subject. For example, through understanding the Quran through a philosophical approach, understanding the Quran through the Quran in science, the Quran in astronomy, the Quran in medicine. These are all genres that emerged. Another is using empirical evidence. So relying on facts, relying on empirical evidence to look at the Quran. This is one genre that emerged. Another is, for example, intellectual tafsir of the Quran. There are some that, they're PhDs, they're academics, and they look at the intellectual aspect of the Quran. And then there's also the personal opinion, the tafsir bil-ra'i, which is something that is forbidden and something that is haram. So before we go into explaining these in details, what emerged and what were the phases, first we need to ask, why were there various methods in the Quran? Why did various methods appear with regards to the Quran? What were the factors that influenced the understanding of the Quran and influenced different methods and different approaches to the Quran? The first is that obviously the Quran was revealed over 23 years. And the Quran has khas, it has am, it has batin, it has zahir, it has many different approaches to look at the Quran. So obviously when you have something this complicated and something that was revealed over a 23-year period, this was a message. Right now I'm delivering a message that this class is 1 hour, 45 minutes. Someone would have to sit and think about what's being said and put it all together to try to fully understand it. Now imagine someone trying to understand a message that was revealed over 23 years. Of course, obviously, this is naturally it's going to require people to look at it. So this is the nature of the Quran. The Quran has linguistic elements, it has textual indicators, qara'in, it has abrogated verses, it has limited verses to a special context. For example, some verses, they're limited to a specific context, whereas if you read it, you might probably assume that it is the general and primary message of the Quran. So there are many other features, and this naturally it caused different types of tafsirs to emerge. This is one. Second is the directives of the Quran. The Quran says, "O Rasulullah, you deliver the Quran and you also interpret the Quran." So Rasulullah, he not only brought down the Quran upon people, but he also had the task of interpreting and doing tafsir of the Quran. So this opens the door. Brother, can you please close that door? This naturally opens the door for what? When the Quran says Rasulullah, he's the interpreter of the Quran. What does this open the door for? Tafsir al-Ruwa'i, hadith. This opens the door for trying to understand, okay, now the Quran tells us Rasulullah, he not only brought down the Quran, but he interprets the Quran. This naturally opens the door for going to Rasulullah and trying to see, okay, what does Rasulullah say about this verse? What does Rasulullah say about that verse? So this is something. Another third reason which influenced the appearance of different methods is the religious inclinations. So within just a few years after the death of Rasulullah, so the third one that we were talking about is religious inclinations, meaning in terms of jurisprudence, in terms of theology. This naturally caused people to have different approaches towards the Quran. Right now we, the Shi'as, we have the Imami school of thought. When we read a verse in the Quran, for example, Ya ayyuha rasul balligh ma unzila ilayka min rabbik. When you read this verse, naturally, the first thing that you're going to think about is what? Imam Ali and Ghadir. That's the first thing you're going to think about. Others, when they hear about it, they think, for example, that in Mina, Hajjat al-Wada, other things, they try to look at it in different ways. So this naturally caused different tafsirs to emerge. Fourth is reliance on personal opinion. This was something that influenced the tafsir, the approach towards tafsir. And this is something that's natural. Until today, you have people, when they read the Quran, what are they going to do? They say, oh no, this is the way I understand the Quran, this is the way I understand the Quran. This is tafsir al-Quran bil-ra'i, using your own personal opinion to bring out a meaning of the Quran. And this is something that, was criticized, and this was something that was forbidden, and it was something that was going on during the time of the Prophet, after the Prophet, and until today. So this caused a genre to emerge. The fifth is the influence of non-Muslim thoughts and ideas on the Muslims. That influenced the tafsir of the Quran. Today, it not only influenced the tafsir of the Quran, it influenced our hadith. Today you go and you look at books of hadith, you see that there are verses, there are ahadith that are referred to as what? Isra'iliyat. Isra'iliyat, meaning they're influenced by Jewish thoughts and Jewish beliefs. Because, the Arabs, the Muslims, there were individuals that joined the religion of Islam, for example, during the time of Umar, Ka'b al-Ahbar. He joined and he was very close to the second Khalifa Umar, and he influenced the thought process. So today, you go and you look at, for example, books of hadith, you find many traditions that are exactly going in line with the thinking of the Old Testament. And they're very far from our belief system. These, what scholars refer to as Israeliyat. Now, also these Israeliyat, or these, from other influence from non-Muslims, they impacted the tafsir. For example, you read the story of Musa, you read the story of Prophet Isa, you read, all these in the Quran. This is influenced in one way or another. Second, during the Islamic Golden Era, during the beginning of the Abbasi government, what was that period referred to as? Al-Asr al-Dhahabi, the Islamic Golden Era. What was happening during that time? Many philosophical ideas were being entered into the Muslim realm, the Muslim sphere. So that, it was good in one way, it influenced the tafsir. For example, Ibn Sina, he has a tafsir relying solely on empirical evidence. This is something good. So there was positive, and then there was also, other thoughts of, Greek, these Greek philosophers, Roman philosophers that were also entering and influencing the thought process. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Sometimes it was a good thing. So this was also something that contributed to the difference. The sixth that was the fifth, the influence of non-Muslim thoughts and ideas. The sixth influencer that influenced the thought process of tafsir is the differences in the sources and the tools of the mufassir. So for example, just like people today, there are some people today that rely on logic. You talk to them, you have to use logic to talk to them. You have to use aql to talk to them. You have to use reason to talk to them. There were others that said, no, you know what, let's put this all aside. I'm just going to take my Quran. If Imam al-Baqir said this about this hadith, this verse, or Rasulullah said this, they rely more on tafsir, on hadith. So one mufassir relies more on logic and reason. One mufassir relies more on hadith. We have a genre of tafsir that is only hadith, nothing else. The author doesn't even say anything. He just says, he puts the verse and he says, Imam Sadiq said this about this, Imam al-Baqir, Imam al-Radha, and this is what they said about it. And we'll explain this inshallah. We have, for example, others that rely on empirical evidence. Only tafsir ilmi, meaning using only science and using only empirical evidence. I'm not going to accept a verse in the Quran that might, allude to some type of something that is hard to, explain, something that's difficult to make sense. And this is one, Tafsir al-Ilmi, which is written by Al-Tantawi, Al-Jawhari. And this is called Al-Jawahir fi Tafsir al-Quran. This wasn't, he was born, and he passed away in 1940. He was from Al-Azhar, Al-Shaykh al-Tantawi. He wrote a book, Jawahir fi Tafsir al-Quran. This is called Al-Jawahir fi Tafsir al-Quran. Basically, Tafsir al-Jawahir. He wrote a tafsir only relying on empirical evidence. So others, for example, from the Sufi mindset and the Irfan and things like that, they rely on their tafsir through the shuhud, the mukashafat. Someone had a dream regarding this verse. Someone, he was inspired, and this is what he understood from this verse. We also have this. So this also, influenced the tafsir, the internal witnessing, the shuhud and the mukashafat. So at the end of the day, you see that these differences in the sources and the tools of the mufassir, basically what does this person rely on most? That influenced the tafsir. You have tafsirs that only talk about, for example, the linguistic approach of the Quran. It talks about the i'jaz, the using the language of the Quran. This emerged, a tafsir emerged. You have tafsir that talks about astronomy, tafsir that talks about science, tafsir that talks about other aspects. And the seventh and last one that we are covering is a tafsir that was influenced by the demands of the era that you're living in. So for example, today, my understanding of the Quran is going to be different if I was born 500 years ago. And 500 years ago was different from someone who was at the time of the Prophet. Each era, it brings its own understanding of the Quran. So, for example, someone who's living in a country that is all fighting and jihad and, there's always war, when they read a verse, قَاتِلُ الْجَاهِدِ الْكُفَّارَ وَالْمُنَافِقِينَ, what do they understand about this? You have to go and fight. That's what you understand. But if you're living in an era where you're at peace, there's no war, what would you understand from this jihad? Jihad al-nafs. Jihad al-nafs comes out of this. So each era, it brings its own understanding of the Quran. And we have many scholars that have written tafsirs regarding the era and the challenges that they're facing of that specific era. For example, Tafsir Qutb, Sayyid Qutb, the Egyptian Mufassir, it's called Fi Dhilal al-Quran. He wrote a tafsir, basically it's speaking to the people during that time. The thinking of the Arabic nationalism and thinking of the Arabs against Israel. That's all that he would understand from the Quran. Now we're living in an era, for example, of Islamophobia. When you read a verse, you might understand something else from someone who didn't experience any of this Islamophobia, someone who didn't experience any of these difficulties and challenges. So these are the reasons why different tafsirs emerged. Now, what is the history of tafsir? What is the history of methods and approaches? The first type of tafsir that emerged during the time of Rasulullah was tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, understanding the Quran through the Quran. And this is obvious, because how can the Quran be tibyanan likulli shay? How can the Quran clarify everything, and it's a blueprint for living your life, yet it can't interpret itself? This doesn't make sense. The Quran interprets itself, and the Quran, it's nur, it's light. What is light? Light is something that lights up the room. It lights up the room so other people can see. And what else? It's also visible in itself. Just like water. Water, it cleans and it is also clean in itself. So this is the same with the Quran. The Quran, it enlightens us, it broadens our horizons, but yet it is clear in itself and it interprets itself. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he would be the first mufassir of the Quran, where sometimes he would use verses to explain other verses. So for example, one day Rasulullah, he recited this verse, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَلَمْ يَلْبَسُوا إِيمَانَهُمْ بِظُلْمٍ أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمُ الْأَمْنُ وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. The verse is talking about the mu'mineen, those who believe and they do not have any dhulm, any oppression with their iman. They don't oppress. Those people, they are the guided ones. So when this verse came down, Muslims, they were worried. They said, Ya Rasulullah, which one of us is not a zalim? By sinning, this is a dhulm as well. This is a type of oppression. You don't have to necessarily go and oppress someone else. Just by sinning, by disobeying Allah, this is a type of dhulm. So he tells the Muslims, they were very worried. So then Rasulullah, he tells them the oppression, the dhulm in this verse is not referring to any sin. The oppression, the dhulm in this verse is referring to idol worship, to shirk. And then Rasulullah, he uses this other verse, وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِابْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعَظُهُ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. Luqman, he tells his son, oh my dear son, do not associate a partner with Allah. Why? Because shirk, associating a partner with Allah, it is great dhulm. It is the greatest manifestation of dhulm. So here Rasulullah, he uses another verse, the verse of Luqman, to explain to the Muslims that the dhulm that's referring in the prior verse is not any type of dhulm, but it's referring to shirk. So tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, using the Quran to interpret the Quran. And we have many examples of this. We have many examples of this. For Rasulullah used to practice this, Imam Ali used to practice this. Those who truly understand the Quran, they would practice this. You know, the verse of Ghadir, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي. Today, after the Muslims gave bay'ah to Imam Ali, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم. Today your religion is complete. وأتممت عليكم نعمتي. And the ni'mah of Allah is complete. Okay? وَرَضِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا. What is this ni'mah that we are talking about? You go, al-wilaya, but you go to another verse. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawm ad-din. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Guide us to the right path. Which path? Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim. The path of those who you have given the ni'mah to. What is the ni'mah here that you do dua for every day in Surah Al-Fatiha? Ni'mat al-wilaya. Meaning, not only wilaya, meaning the whole religion should be complete, because the religion was complete with Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati. The ni'mah was complete on the day of Ghadir. In Al-Fatiha you say, Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim. This is one. Another, for example, and we're going to go into detail regarding this. Another is one day during the time of the Khilafah of the second Khalifa, Umar ibn al-Khattab, there was a lady that gave birth when she was 6 months pregnant. So she got married, 6 months later she gave birth. So what did they do? They came and they told her, you have committed adultery. You have committed zina. She said, no, I didn't. They told her, why did you? How come you gave birth at 6 months? Usually the pregnancy should be 9 months. She told them, I didn't. They tell her, you have committed adultery. She says, call Ali ibn Abi Talib. They call Imam Ali. Imam Ali, he says, I could prove from the Quran that she did not commit adultery. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he comes and he recites 2 verses in the Quran. The first, وَحَمْلُهُ وَفِصَالُهُ ثَلَاثُونَ شَهْرًا. The verse is saying that the pregnancy and the suckling, the nursing, is 30 months. Okay? 30 months. The nursing and the pregnancy, a total of 30 months. In another verse, Allah says, وَالْوَالِدَاتِ يُرْضِعْنَ أَوْلَادَهُنَّ حَوْلَيْنِ كَامِلَيْنِ لِمَنْ أَرَادَ أَنْ يُتِمَّ الرَّضَاعَةِ. The mothers, they can nurse their children for 2 years. 2 years is how many months? 24 months. You have 30, which was both of them in the other one. You subtract the 24, you have 6 months. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says 6 months is the minimum pregnancy. You don't need to hurt this lady. He saved the life of a lady by doing Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. This is something that we will look at later on, and we're going to look at what are the rules. Can you, anytime you come and you do it? No, it has restrictions and conditions. The second type of tafsir that emerged soon after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi is a tafsir al-rawa'i, the narrative exegesis. The tafsir relying on hadith. Now this is tafsir bil-rawaya, one name, a tafsir al-manqul, another name, a tafsir al-ma'thur. These are all names for this type of tafsir. Al-ma'thur, al-manqul, التفسير بالرواية, تفسير الحديث. So this refers to the hadith of the Prophet, the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And because Rasulullah, he was the one who has the right to interpret the tafsir. Now, after Rasulullah, you have Imam Ali, you have the Ahl al-Bayt. They are the ones who interpret the tafsir. Now, soon after Rasulullah, most Muslims were saying, Qala Rasulullah this, Qala Rasulullah that. They're trying to go Rasulullah. Then after, during the time of Imam Sadiq and after Imam Sadiq, there was, the division had been solidified. Right after the death of Rasulullah, there wasn't the Sunni Shia thing. It wasn't that, solidified, the identity. But then once you have, these are the Shia, these are the Sunnah, these are the Sufi, these are the Mu'tazila, these are the Ash'ara. After that, the tafsir al-rawa'i, it also took its own shape. So for example, in the beginning, the tafsir were Qala Rasulullah. Then later on you see that, no, there's the development of the Shi'i hadith, Shi'i tafsir, the development of the Sunni tafsir. And over time, this developed into its own genre. It became its own genre. For example, and we're going to go into detail regarding this, some of the most prominent books of tafsir that rely on hadith. What are they? In the Shi'i school of thought. The beginning ones. Some of the earliest ones was a tafsir by the name of Tafsir al-Ayyashi. Tafsir al-Ayyashi. This was during the time of the Ghayb al-Sughra, during the time of the minor occultation. Tafsir al-Ayyashi. Another is Tafsir Imam al-Mansub. It's basically attributed to Imam al-Hasan al-Askari. Now, scholars, they don't know how authentic it is, but there is a tafsir attributed to Imam al-Hasan al-Askari. A third is Tafsir al-Qummi, Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Qummi. This is a tafsir of the full Quran. Tafsir al-Ayashi is not the full Quran. It goes, up to about half the Quran or 1/3 of the Quran. Tafsir al-Qummi is the full Quran. He was also living during the era of the Ghaybat al-Sughra. And he is one of the teachers of who? Which class are you guys taking here? Usul al-Kafi. Kulayni, many of the hadith, who does he narrate from? Ali ibn Ibrahim. He narrates Ali ibn Ibrahim. If you recall the class, in the beginning he says an Ali ibn Ibrahim. Ali ibn Ibrahim is Tafsir al-Qummi. He is the Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Qummi. He is one of the narrators of, he has a tafsir of the Quran. So this is one. And then we're going to talk more about the tafsir al-Ruwa'i later on. Now you have a genre of tafsir. The tafsir is only a hadith of the Ahl al-Bayt, narrations of Rasulullah and the Ahl al-Bayt regarding the tafsir. Then the third type that emerged later on was a tafsir bil-Ra'i, tafsir based on opinion. And this emerged soon after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, soon after the death of Rasulullah, where they came and they started reading a verse in the Quran, and they would give their own collective opinions, ignoring the textual evidence and the qara'in, the indicators and the parameters, the dhawabat of the Quran. And this is a tafsir that is severely condemned by Rasulullah and by the Ahl Bayt. And the verse in the Quran also talks about this. فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ ابْتِغَاءَ الْفِتْنَةِ وَابْتِغَاءَ تَأْوِيلِهِ. And those who in their hearts there is disease, this is in Surah Al-Imran, the first few verses that we cited last time. Those who in their hearts there's disease, they follow the verses that are not very clear, the ambiguous verses, to give their own opinion regarding the Quran, and this is something that is haram. Then you have new methods that were introduced. For example, a tafsir, this is the fourth now. The third was a tafsir bil-Ra'i. The fourth is the tafsirs that were based upon new methods, that new types of knowledge, knowledge that came into the society, discussions that came into the society. For example, theological tafsir. Tafsir that only looks at theology, aqa'id, ilm al-kalam. A tafsir that is philosophical. A tafsir that is jurisprudential. For example, tafsir fi ahkam al-Quran. A tafsir that is only in the laws of rulings. These are, these new sciences and new thoughts and philosophies that were entering into the Muslim realm, they allowed for this new genre to emerge. So, for example, the theological exegesis, the tafsir al-kalam, in the study of kalam, theology, there was a tafsir that was focused on, for example, predestination and free will. If someone is thinking about predestination, every verse in the Quran, you're going to have a different perspective about it. If you believe in free will, every verse in the Quran, you're going to have a different perspective. The Ash'ara and the Mu'tazila, they began to interpret the Quran based on their ideologies. Just like now, we interpret the Quran based on our ideology. For example, when we see a verse in the Quran that says, Yadullahi fawqa aydihim, what do we think about it? Our ideology dictates that God does not have a literal hand, right? Allah can't have a literal hand, then He will be limited. But then there's a group, so we have to understand the Quran, and our scholars have written so much tafsir when they see Yadullah, the hand of God, wujuhun yawma idhin nadra, they interpret it into a different way, using of course hadith of the Ahl Bayt. They're not doing their own ra'i, of course. But those who believe in, for example, God has a hand, when they come to these verses, they're going to understand it completely differently. So these are theological exegesis of the Quran. And then you have jurisprudential exegesis. For example, ayat al-ahkam, the verses of ruling. Scholars say there are about 500 verses in the Quran that talk about ahkam. The fasting, hajj, zakat, all of these rulings. So who's going to explain these? There are books that were written specifically gathering only the verses of ahkam, the verses of fasting, the verses of salah, the verses of zakat, the verses of khums, the verses of amr bil all of the ahkam, the rulings. They gathered them and they wrote its own genre. And this emerged in the first Islamic century, meaning in the 7th century CE, Common Era. In the first Islamic century, this was something that emerged. Now, so another thing that emerged in the 3rd Islamic century was Tafsir bil-Ishara, elusive exegesis. And this introduced mystical and Gnostic, approaches towards the Quran. Tasawwuf, Sufi tafsir of the Quran, which relies more on ta'wil, looking at the deeper meaning of the verse, not looking at, rather than looking at something that's apparent, they come and they look at a very deep meaning. For example, Ibn Arabi, a Muslim scholar, he would use this method. Ghazali would use this method. They would use this method, this Sufi tafsir of the Quran, and this emerged during the 3rd Islamic century. During the 3rd Islamic century. So for example, let me give you an example. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu qatilu alladhina yalunakum min al-kuffar. O you people who believe, fight those who are fighting you from the kuffar. Now, you would understand the zahir, the apparent of this verse. How would someone who's a Sufi understand this verse? He would say, fight the one who's fighting you from the kuffar. This means fight your soul. This means this is a jihad of the nafs. Fight your soul and try to beat your nafs to, try to get it to worship Allah and do all of these things. So, because your closest enemy is your soul. It tries to bring you away from Allah. Nafs al-ammara bis-su'. So, this is one way. And now, with this ta'wil, of course, we in the Shia school of thought, we also have ta'wil. For example, verses in the Quran, you say this refers to the Ahl al-Bayt. One verse, Maraj al-Bahrayni al-Taqiyan. The two oceans, they come, this is in Surah Al-Rahman. Maraj al-Bahrayni al-Taqiyan. The two oceans, they come and they meet with one another. Baynahuma barzakhun la yabghiyan. Between them, there's a barzakh, something in between. It doesn't allow this body of water to go into this body of water. You've seen this, sometimes there's clear water and there's salt water. They don't come and mix with one another. بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. Now this has an apparent meaning. Apparent meaning, something you've seen in pictures probably, where two bodies of water don't mix. Imam al-Sadiq and the Ahl al-Bayt, they give an elusive tafsir of this. They give an internal meaning. What is it? Maraj al-Bahrayni al-Taqiyan. Two bodies, they come, Imam Ali and Fatima al-Zahra. بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان. Between them is a barzakh, that is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان. And from them comes the pearls and the jewelry, referring to the ocean. But in this one, the hadith says Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein. Now, but the difference with this, we're relying on a hadith. We're not making this up. We're not coming and saying, okay, this sounds nice, let me come and put this together. No, we're relying on a hadith from the Ahl al-Bayt. It has substance. But if you don't rely on a hadith, then it's going to be something that might get you in trouble. And the 5th and final type of tafsir is a comprehensive tafsir. A tafsir that mixes all of these categories. It uses some aql, it uses tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, it uses hadith, it uses, except of course opinion, tafsir bil-ra'i, it refers to tafsir, ta'wil, it has ahkam, it has theological tafsir, and this is the tafsir that is apparent with us today. The new contemporary tafasir that emerge, this is how they are right now. So you don't have a tafsir only tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. You don't have a tafsir that is only hadith tafsir. You don't have a tafsir that only ta'wil tafsir. Today, for example, Allama Tabatabai in his Tafsir al-Mizan, he's used all of these. He's used all of these as a comprehensive, it has a little bit of everything to come and bring out a tafsir that covers all of the aspects of the Quran. And of course now Tabatabai's tafsir is a primary example, but the first one that emerged was using this approach, a comprehensive approach, was Tafsir al-Tusi. Shaykh al-Tusi, over 1,000 years ago. Tafsir al-Tusi, which was Tafsir al-Tibyan. Al-Tibyan, and Tabrasi, another scholar, he wrote a book, Majma' al-Bayan. Majma' al-Bayan. These are the first tafsirs that use this comprehensive approach. Now after them, a lot use this. And then, in addition to the comprehensive tafsir, there are new approaches that are emerging until today. For example, someone who has studied sociology, and they read the Quran, what are they going to do? They're going to look at the Quran from a sociological perspective. Someone that has studied psychology, they come and they look at the Quran from a psychological perspective. Someone who's a doctor, who's in astronomy, for example, they come and they look at all these perspectives, and they come and they bring out Qur'ans. But typically now, it's more of the comprehensive tafsir. So this is the history of the development of the tafsir. We mentioned why these differences emerged, and how did it develop? First it was Al-Quran bil-Quran, and then tafsir, and then the sciences that came, and then tafsir al-Ra'i, and then the comprehensive tafsir. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi al-tahirin. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So we're going